It's time for Recipe of the Day. I have some controversial opinions when it comes to steak, so if you're in an argumentative mood, listen and you can argue with me in your head while I talk. Today I'm telling you how to cook a perfect bone-in ribeye, and really I do think that there are some things that I do differently than a lot of people do, but it does result in the best steak. So first of all, I love a bone-in steak because I do love the meat next to the bone. It tends to be a little bit rarer than in the center of the steak. It's nice and juicy, and then I like that brown crispy crust that gets on some parts of the bone too. Really, really tasty. I also love ribeye because it is well marbled, and I am somebody who prefers a nicely marbled steak over something really lean like a filet mignon. I think that there's a divide in people. Some like one, some like the other. I am going to say that one of my controversies, though, does have to do with the difference between these two cuts and why you need to cook them differently. In particular, I will give you a little teaser and tell you that I'm going to be saying that you should be cooking your ribeye to a minimum of medium, not medium rare. And I know that shocks a lot of people, and it's not just because of my personal preference. There is a reason to my madness, two of them, in fact. Okay, teaser is over. I will get to that soon, but we will go in order. First, so the bone-in ribeye, it comes from the rib primal cut. It is the same thing as a prime rib roast. Essentially, it's just been cut into steaks. As I said, great marbling in there. Now, they can be pretty big, like over a pound usually, and you do want a nice thick one. So quite often these can serve more than one person. The typical bone-in ribeye is sometimes called a bone-in rib steak, and it's sometimes called a cowgirl steak or cowgirl ribeye. And really the tomahawk steak is very similar to this as well. And the cowboy steak, they tend to be thicker, and they are also the bone-in ribeye, but usually they have a longer bone that has been Frenched. Your standard ribeye, the bone is not Frenched. It's really running along the meat the whole way. So that is one of the differences. Okay, let's jump into making this steak with the controversies as they come. So I do recommend that you dry brine the ribeye. I almost always recommend dry brining steak. You just get way more flavor and some extra juiciness and tenderness. So why not? Well, the why not is if you don't have time. If you don't have time, if you haven't thought ahead, you're not doing this ahead of time, then you can't do it. But if you have time, you get a teaspoon of kosher salt. You sprinkle it all over your bone-in ribeye. The one in the recipe is 1¼ pounds. And then I like to also go in with some garlic powder, about half a teaspoon. Sprinkle that all over. Now, sometimes garlic powder can get bitter when it's cooked at a high temperature, but since this is going to be dry brining, it gets the moisture from the steak, which softens it up, and then it doesn't burn in the same way. So I would probably skip the garlic powder if I was not doing the dry brine process, but leave it if you are. So salt and garlic powder, you can do pepper as well if you'd like, and that goes all over the steak, and then you put it on a rack, set over a pan or a plate in the fridge for at least 2 hours, but as long as 8 hours. If you don't have the 2 hours, you can do it just for 30 minutes, and that will at least moisten up the salt so it kind of like melts into the steak a bit, and that does make a little bit of a difference. Okay, when you are ready to cook the steak, you are preheating your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, and you are getting out a skillet that's big enough for your steak, and that is heating over medium-high heat. And I have not yet told you to take the steak out of the fridge, and that's because you should not. It is best to cook the steak straight from fridge cold, especially if you like your steak medium, medium rare, or rare, because you actually want the steak to have contact with your skillet for as long as possible to develop that really nice crust on the outside. And so if your steak is cold inside, it's going to take it longer to reach your desired temperature, which gives you longer contact time in the skillet. So that is one of the controversies here, is that I'm not telling you to take the steak out of the fridge for half an hour to come to room temperature before cooking it. That is something that really, really benefits a roast because you want that more even cooking, and it can tend to be like really, really cold right in the middle and then just be cooking on the outside in the oven, right? So for really even cooking, you want that for like a roast. not for a steak, especially if you want it less well done. Now, if you like your steak more well done, medium well or well done, then you can take it out for 30 minutes before cooking it. And that's going to have it come to room temperature. So it takes less long to cook. So it has less time in contact with the skillet. So it's not going to burn in the time it takes for the temperature to come up. Okay. So you've got your skillet over medium high heat. Your oven is preheated to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. You're going to get those steaks out of the fridge and brush them all over with cooking oil, about a tablespoon. And then the steak goes into that very hot skillet and you're cooking it for 5 minutes. Then flip it over and transfer the skillet with the steak in it into the oven. And then you are roasting it until the desired temperature is reached. And I am telling you, the desired temperature is medium. So I do like to use a probe thermometer for this. So it's right in the middle of the steak, monitoring the temperature throughout. And you want to take it out when it's between 135 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, why medium? There are two reasons, actually. First, as we saw back when I told you about how I make a prime rib roast, because this cut has so much beautiful marbling and connective tissue, you really want that to have a chance to melt. Actually, that fat is kind of hard or firm in the meat when it is cold, when it's not melted and cooked. It's little bits of it. You don't necessarily detect it, but it's definitely adding a firmness to the middle of your meat. What you want to do is make sure that that has a chance to melt, both so that it is softened and so that that fat is melting and adding extra moisture to the meat. That happens when you get it to medium. Now, on the other hand, if you're doing a filet mignon, that does not have that same marbling. And so you actually do want that one done under medium, like a medium rare, so that you're not cooking out the little bit of moisture that is in there. You're not going to get the benefit of having that fat melting because there isn't fat. And so then you do want to cook that one less. See, it depends on the cut of steak, how you want it done. The second reason for cooking the steak to medium is that it is on the bone, and the bone acts to insulate the meat from the heat. And so you end up with the meat at the bone being less well done than the meat in the middle. So if you cook the middle to medium, you're still going to have that kind of like medium rare along the bone. If you cook the middle to medium rare, you're going to have very rare meat along the bone. So that's the other reason why you want to do your bone-in ribeye to medium in the center. And that is going to take 8 to 12 minutes in the oven after you sear that first side. I can't be more specific than that because it really does depend on like how hot exactly your skillet got, how thick your steak is, how accurate your oven actually is. It's between 8 to 12 minutes. Stick that probe thermometer in there and you can monitor the temperature and take it out when it's at 135 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit or whatever temperature you like best. And then you're going to transfer it immediately out of the skillet onto a plate or cutting board because you don't want it to be in contact with the heat of the skillet anymore because it will keep rising in temperature, okay? You don't want to keep cooking it. We want it to stop. So transfer it, and then I like to put a tablespoon or so of butter, like a couple little slices of butter on top. They're going to melt from the heat of the steak while it rests for about 5 minutes. And that butter is going to like drip down into the meat and be extra delicious. I actually have a recipe for butter for steak that was perfectly designed just for that. It is delicious. If you have the time to make a batch of that up, it's going to be amazing on top of your steak. Okay, I will put the link to this recipe in the show notes for this podcast episode, or you can head to cookthestory.com/ROTD and get it there. Everything there is arranged by date, so it's helpful to know that today is June 20th of 2025. And I'm just going to tell you that if you understand what I'm saying about cooking steak and you like my logic behind this and how I'm testing things and figuring things out and giving you really good advice, you should bookmark my beef page because all of the advice is there. You're going to get the recipes you want whenever you're cooking any kind of beef. You're going to find it. Go to cookthestory.com/category/beef and you will see it all there. I am Christine Pittman from cookthestory.com, thecookful.com, the all new chicken cookbook, and from this podcast, Recipe of the Day. I hope you have a great day. Let's get cooking.